Justin Poulin and Brian Bartel here with another power supply video. Susie Collins not joining us today, but Brian and I are going to be talking about the challenges around purchase services. And so, Brian, welcome back. Thanks for joining the team on all of these video insights that we share on a regular basis from the power supply video channel, YouTube, etc. Make sure you're following our YouTube channel, but you're probably seeing this on LinkedIn. And Brian, obviously people can see a little bit of your background, but I always felt like as we tee up this purchase services conversation, that the newer team members that were hired into supply chain often got the purchase services agreements to deal with as kind of a way to break them in or get their feet wet, especially when it comes to contracting. Have you seen that as well, especially in large organizations?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's 100% right, Justin. When I was at Legacy Health, I was working kind of under a contract administrator with IT, heavily supporting that. And then once they're like, all right, Brian, you're ready to go. You're 100% right. Purchase services is exactly where I fell. So all of those very different but fun categories or different, areas inside of that purchase service category for sure.
In so many ways, IT is a purchase service too, right? It's just a kind of a different structure than what you normally would think of, but I think you run into some similar sort of contractual conversations or themes, I guess.
Yeah, and IT, I would say, again, it depends, like you and I were talking about before this call, just, the broad stroke of purchase services. In a larger IDN, I would venture to say the ones that I've seen typically do have IT as its own category, just because of the spend, the amount of complexity, the risk, and again, just the reliance that has to be there between the IT subject matter experts and whoever's running those contracts too.
One of the things, and maybe what I would say is a traditional purchase service is it's usually people coming on site. And so you have a high degree of variability in terms of like, how do you evaluate quality, especially from one region of the country to another? I've done a lot of service sales, and I've always noticed that it's really important, from the vendor or supplier side to align sales and service closely. And honestly, sometimes you see organizations silo service all the way up to the COO. And at the same time, sales is kind of rolling up to the CFO. There might be a division leader, but the problem with that I've always seen is it winds up where service and sales are not aligned at the account level because they're kind of being measured and getting direction, from different verticals within their organization, which sometimes can send some pretty mixed messages to the customer. And again, especially when you're talking about trying to standardize, a service that's being delivered, by an individual, especially if it's not really a commodity service. I'm thinking about like repairs when I bring this up, and there's a whole host of things that fall under a repair category, right? But sometimes that can really be different from one area to another. You mentioned being at a large organization and having responsibility over purchase services. Does it require some specialization to get a handle on those contracts?
Yeah, when I first stepped into that role, I was like, I have no idea what's happening right now, because I had everything from elevator repair, landscaping, and then contracted clinical services too. So you're looking at like language translator services.
Interpreters. Yeah.
Interpreters. There we go. Yeah. And so again, it's such a wide variety that's inside of there. I mean, you can look at everything from some facilities have people that come in and water their plants. Again, something that you don't think about, but there's contract and expense behind that, versus some of these more complex things like we were talking about earlier too, with interoperative neurological monitoring too, IONM. That's another category that's out there too.
That's also tough because it's a high degree of variability just in terms of the type of service. Like to try to get somebody, especially new, to be really experienced. And then in all of these different areas, I mean, you can't set a standard KPI, right? When you're looking at, like single use products and you're looking at inventory, there are a lot of things that you can sort of line up from one manufacturer or one category to another that have some common themes. But in purchase services, it's almost like you have to become an expert on the service itself to really have some good measurables around the quality of the service that's being delivered, correct?
To some degree, I would say yes, and I think people that are very well versed in purchase services, for sure, they definitely get, and they understand the business. But a lot of that too, Justin, is building the relationship with the business operations unit. So again, whatever that contracting procurement person is handling, building those relationships with the real subject matter experts to help with those decisions. That really helps too. So that's what I found myself is going out, to the different hospitals and meeting with whether it's the clinical directors or managers or frontline staff and asking questions about the purchase service that you have questions about. Again, because to your point, credentialing is a big thing too. The credentialing required for something like IO&M is much different than somebody, like I said, that's coming in to water the plants. So there's a lot of questions that you have to ask, not only the business unit operation managers, whoever's that contract is servicing, but then also getting well-versed with your legal teams as well to help with craft some of those more complex contracts as well.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's really important to do business reviews. And I feel like sometimes, people in contracting or, whoever's working or owning sort of the supply chain aspects of the agreement sort of set it up, put it on maybe a 3 to 5 year term, and then kind of disappear into the background. And to your point, whoever's living with the service, the business unit leader, et cetera, they wind up trying to manage that contract to some extent. But honestly, I'm a huge fan of at least semi-annual business reviews, if not quarterly reviews, depending on, what level of spend you're talking about. But honestly, I think where a lot of purchase services contracts fall apart is a misalignment on what is it for customer satisfaction. Because all of a sudden the supplier and, the end user within the healthcare organization are not necessarily aligned, and the complaints or issues around service that might even be understandable. There might be good explanations. There's just no vehicle for communicating that, because I feel like purchase services is there's such a relational aspect to that that needs a regular check-in to make sure that everybody's happy. And a lot of times we put that on the supplier to dictate it. And some are really great about setting out those regular business reviews, and others, don't necessarily see the value in doing that. But I kind of want to bring this back, to what we were just talking about in terms of supply chain's role. I feel like it's imperative that if you're managing those purchase service agreements, that you ensure that there is some sort of regular cadence for business reviews, and that you are there so that you can make sure that, the clinical department, if it's clinical that's receiving the service, and the supplier are sort of working together and helping to collaborate to realize what you expected to be the savings or the deliverable. Because sometimes costs can get out of control too, right?
Yeah, and so that's a perfect example too, Justin, of what I was thinking about. Again, at one of the past IDNs I was at, they had a children's hospital, and so the window washing came up, and I was like, oh, window washing, a lot of spend potentially there, and it had been a long-term incumbent that had that business for a long time. So I thought, oh, this will be easy. Let's just go out for bid and see what's there. We'll run an RFP, and you would think that. I mean, the building was falling down. People were like, you cannot do that. These people have worked here forever. They dress up like as superheroes when they clean the building. And so that's a really good thing too, to think about as purchase services. You're talking about this cadence of holding the supplier responsible, but the old adage goes too, friends pay list price. And sometimes that puts supply chain at a disadvantage, because if there are long-term relationships, which a lot of purchase services are, people have been, working together for a long time, they're friends. And so going out for bid can be something that is like almost a damage that happens between the business unit and the supplier. And then they'll, pin it back on supply chain, which is never a fun thing either. It's like, hey, we want to go out and see what the market price for this is. But those relationships, you're 100%, that's very critical. And it goes both ways. We need to hold the supplier responsible. But again, we need to be outside looking at other opportunities today, and especially in today's world with just the financial pressures that everybody is under.
I love that you brought that relationship up, because it can be incredibly disruptive. And, I think a lot of times people look at products and say, okay, like even as we look at having substitutes, and we know it's not that simple, but a lot of people are like thinking, okay, with products, we can just sub this one in. there's no clinical difference. It's going to be a 1-for-1 swap. You basically use this product very similar as you would the old product, especially the closer you get to commodity categories. It may not have a lot of impact, but these purchase service agreements, to your point, because of the day-to-day relationship, sometimes the people that are coming in and working are an extension of the business unit itself. And they've put a lot of work into establishing that relationship and sort of the expectations that they have of each other. And so to then start a new relationship can be, people don't like to change, right? That can be kind of a terrifying proposition for them. But at the same time, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you're not overpaying for convenience of, not making those changes and establishing new relationships. The last thing I want to ask you before we wrap up, you mentioned working in a large health system. Now you're in a smaller community hospital, and we just know that the size of the teams are smaller. Specialization is less as a result of that. So what kind of unique challenges do you find in your setting for trying to handle purchase services, since you might not have somebody dedicated to that category?
And that's a great question, Justin. In the position that I'm at now, and even more so in the one that I came at before, where it was myself and then basically like 2.5 other employees to run the entire supply chain for a 60-bed hospital. It's challenging. And so you're right. I would venture to say that probably a lot of people that are listening to this that are working either in standalone, rural, or in a larger group, but doesn't have hospitals that are close by to support. It's very challenging. And again, where do you start, right? You've got all these different fires that you're dealing with on the supply side of things. But I think, honestly, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of purchase services that are going unmanaged. Again, they just, they get set up, they have the auto renew language. People don't really know that there's options. They just know, oh, hey, so-and-so shows up and does this every time that we need them to, and there's no questions asked. And then just like with invoices, I mean, you'd be amazed, Justin. I sit down sometimes, that's the first thing that I do is, all right, what's this purchase service that we're looking at? I go pull the invoices, and then I start going line by line, just looking at, and you'd be amazed at how many invoice discrepancies you can find just as these simple, just again, it's not in my contract, but I already know that you're paying the incorrect rate just because of what's in the contract versus what people have been signing off or approving on the invoice side of things too.
Do you see yourself less as having ownership in this setting and more being there as a trusted advisor or somebody who's an expert, to just kind of give them some insights that they wouldn't otherwise be able to have on their own? Are you educating and training business unit leaders versus coming alongside and really taking co-ownership?
That's hard. That's a loaded question, Justin.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's always nice to have those conversations and start explaining contracts, because you'd be amazed. A lot of people that are in manager or director positions, they don't even really know the different aspects of a contract. And so, yes, absolutely having those conversations, explaining to them what the different terms mean. But it's also difficult, like in supply chain, we like to have control, especially when you start looking at par areas and inventory. But we have all these metrics in place to keep things safe, to keep us in with the guardrails. We don't run around out of stock. And so when you start looking at purchase services and that gets added onto your list of things, or maybe that's your specialty, there is that inclination to be like, this has not been managed, especially if you find invoice issues or something that's been happening. It is very difficult not to just say, I'm going to wrap my hands around this and take care of it. And that will never work, because again, back to the relationship point, the people that are, working with these companies, they have that business relationship. And so again, it's a great question, Justin. I just laugh because I can think of so many different examples where it's like, it can go both ways for sure, but we definitely need to have a seat at that table and help with these purchase services for sure, especially if you've got contracting experience and can sit down and kind of help educate people as well. Just be a little bit cautious and understand that there might be some long-term relationships that you're going to uncover as well.
Well, interestingly, I mean, some of these people might have gone to school together. They might have grown up together. That's kind of the nature of purchase services. So you are talking about a very different situation in many cases. And, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, that are watching these videos. Definitely comment in the comments section and let us know, what your thoughts are, or do you agree with Brian, or maybe you want to share some blinded examples from your own organization about, how you've tried to tackle that, and some situations that you've run into, or some strategies. Brian, anything we're missing before we wrap up? Anything that needs to be added?
No, I'm glad we had this conversation, because I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh man, I know there's probably like 5 or 6 contracts now that I need to start looking at and dealing with. So it's just a lot, again, we all deal with a tremendous amount. It's fun. Purchase services is fun because it's something different than the routine that we deal with. But again, it does take a different set of eyes to be looking at these different relationships. So thanks, Justin. I've got another 5 things on my list now.
Well, I'll tell you, we do these videos to kind of remind other people and get them thinking. I never thought that it would actually happen as, part of recording them, Brian. So good luck, because we're recording this in the middle of the holidays. I can't believe you're about to go digging into that. But thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned for more videos. Brian has joined Susie and I, and is just doing a great job, and really enjoy doing these. Comment, share. Definitely want to hear from you. And we'll also throw out our email address if you have any feedback for the Power Supply team. It's info@powersupplymedia.com. And thank you for watching.